you do a full count of our staff, we're up over 9,500 folks. Right? It's about a $2.5 billion a year operation. So it's a pretty significant operation, pretty much capabilities in just about any technology area that you could imagine. So you can imagine folks have a tremendous amount of diversity in terms of their expertise and so on. The team I would consider the team I directly lead, okay, would be what we call the Executive Council. And that is made up of 17 members, including myself. And that has what we call our sector heads, as well as department heads, along with our general counsel, chief of staff, a couple of a few assistant directors, and so on. And, big part of what we do from an executive council standpoint is, of course, work on strategy. We take a look at what are some of the operational activities that are going on and make sure that we're providing appropriate oversight of those activities. We're looking at what kind of development opportunities should we be providing that we're not providing to, our folks, to all of our people. And then I spend a lot of time actually mentoring, folks both. And I mentor folks all the way from, very junior folks up to some of our most, senior leaders. And I do a lot of reviews, with respect to projects that are going on. So I maintain a fairly good awareness of representative work that we're doing across the lab. I engage, of course, at senior levels of government on a regular basis, just ensuring that, we're doing the right thing from an organizational standpoint, from a government, sponsor perspective. And then a lot of other activity. Yeah, it's just, every day is really quite different. So let's talk leadership philosophy, because I actually have a leadership philosophy that I've developed over decades, and it's a pretty straightforward one. And it's a philosophy that I share with our incoming staff. We have an all staff orientation program that folks get to go through, and I am the last speaker at that orientation program. I share my leadership philosophy with them, and for one of the reasons is I want them to know what my expectations are, and I want them to know what their expectations should be of me, right? And so I also share that leadership philosophy when we have our executive council offsites, which we generally have, a couple times per year. All right. And at the beginning of each of those offsites, I share that philosophy with them. So let me share it with you. Okay. All right. So it all starts with one of our core values. It's a bedrock of integrity, unquestionable integrity. Okay. Now, given that we have that integrity, we're able to trust one another. Now, trusting one another doesn't mean that we agree with one another, right? But if we have that integrity and we have that trust, it allows us to engage in what I characterize as respectful debate around ideas. This is important from the standpoint, again, one of empathy. When we disagree with one another on something, we should be able to engage in a respectful discussion, but that discussion should work under the assumption that people have good intentions, in fact, best intentions. And so by trying to figure out where is this person coming from, we can have a deeper engagement in that discussion, right? Okay, once we've engaged in that respectful debate around ideas, we make a decision and we commit to the decision. And committing to the decision means that no matter what side of the decision you fall on, all right, we're going to all align and follow that, right? And this is important because, just to be blunt, I'm not a big believer in compromise per se, right? I'm a big believer in doing what's best for the organization and for the nation. And so, making sense of a lot of conflicting opinions, if you go for compromise, you'll sometimes water down what could potentially be a truly, impactful approach to solving some tough problems. Once we've committed to the decisions, we will hold each other accountable. All right. That also means that we're going to help one another, right? But you have a job to do, I have a job to do, and we should expect each other to, in general, be carrying out those roles. And then the final piece is be a part of the team, right? It's a lot more fun there's that fun again, right? It's a lot more fun to be a part of the team than to be working in isolation. And leaders in particular, they want to work and be part of something bigger than themselves. And so that's the leadership philosophy.
Well, I hear so many different pieces in there that I'd love to dig into with you, but maybe we could start with the empathy.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing we see a lot is empathy often gets construed as trying to appease, trying to not just understand where everyone's coming from, but maybe make everyone happy at the end of the day and sort of arrive at this kumbaya organization. But it sounds like you have a different take on it.
I
Which
do.
is more on the understanding and respect side. And wonder if you could share a little bit more about sort of how you've arrived at that view.
So I'll share a story first. When I first became director, I was asked, "Are you going to run the executive council as a democracy?" And my response was no. Okay. But my response was no, not because I wanted to have this control over the executive council. It was because I knew that there were decisions that we were going to make that would impact some people more than others. And I felt that they should have disproportionate influence on the decisions, right? There's an empathy aspect to that. And if we just did a straight vote, those people might be overruled, even though they're going to be most affected by the decision. And so by, having everybody provide input, but giving disproportionate influence to the folks that are most impacted by the decision, we can arrive in a place where, most people that would be most affected will have the most say in what happens, right? Now, in terms of, it's not that we don't seek compromise if it makes sense, right? It's just that we don't approach a decision with compromise in mind. We approach a decision, and it's now just part of our DNA, right? We approach a decision in terms of what is it that we should do that will have the greatest impact, right? And then it's, a matter of building trust through decisions that you make over time that, okay, hey, look, someone may not agree with the decision, but the track record's pretty good. And so we'll buy in and go with it. But it's, sometimes the decisions can be really rough, and especially when the audience, when the council is split. And it's not that I particularly enjoy making, a call like, that when the council is split. But the reality is that's when I know we'll make actually some of our best decisions, because you'll have people that are really trying to influence the decision, and it'll be a very difficult, call to make. Because, the reality is by the time a decision reaches the executive council or me, a lot of really great people have already tackled it, right?
Well, that shares so much about sort of this understanding of kind of when to lean on that empathy, when, maybe it's time to say, okay, we've got to rip the Band-Aid, we've got to make this decision, we've got to move forward and make that adjustment. Is there a way that you sort of know when a decision has arrived, when it's time to maybe stop seeking input and just put pen to paper and
Yeah.
make that decision?
Yeah. So, just like we follow this formal process for strategy, we actually follow a formal process for decision making. Okay. So, what we do at the executive council, now, every once in a while, we'll do something a little different, but any tough issue, what we do is we follow a two-step decision process. In the first, we identify the problem, we ensure it's circumscribed. So, hey, this is the problem we're trying to tackle, and it's understood. Then we establish a team that will collect data and do analysis, and then develop a set of alternatives, ideally 3. Okay. That team will come before the executive council and present the data, the analysis, and the alternatives. Now, in an ideal world, it'd be 3 really hard alternatives to decide among. Sometimes the alternatives are status quo, nuclear war, the right answer, right? But in an ideal world, you'd have three really hard alternatives to decide among. In that first session, we do not make a decision. Okay. In fact, if somebody starts leaning towards a decision, we remind folks this is not a decision session. We're just trying to understand the alternatives. Once we have understood the alternatives, and every once in a while, rarely, but every once in a while, somebody will come up with a thought or a question that the team had not thought about, and so they need another couple of weeks. So they'll take a couple of weeks, refine the alternatives, and come back. Never more than 2. Right. Then 2 weeks later, we have the decision session. Now, what happens there is we allocate a certain amount of time, and it'll generally be could be an hour and a half kind of discussion. And at the end, I will go around the room to every executive council member asking for their opinions and their rationale, for their opinions, and then we'll make a call. Okay. Sometimes we'll get it wrong. Okay, but we'll make a call, and so we will always make a decision at the end of that decision session. Always.
I am Christine Fox. I am currently a senior fellow with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. Before that, from 2014 to 2022, I was the assistant director for policy and analysis. This is a lab that's not big on failure, and the good reasons for that. One, they take government money. They don't want to fail on government money. That's wasteful. Two, they're making big, hard, important things, right? You shoot a missile, you don't want it to fail. You want it to succeed, right? But Ralph comes along and says, but if you're making a new kind of missile, it's likely to fail at first. And we didn't have these examples at the time, but just look at SpaceX, right? And Starship. I mean, he fails and gets further and fails and gets further. Ralph was trying to get us to be more accepting of that the whole time he's been here. So making, good failure, not failure because you didn't do the math right or you were sloppy in your engineering. No, none of that failure is tolerated. None. And we were very clear. But failure that helps you advance and be innovative, that's encouraged. We even spotlight noble failures here as a part of an awards program that Ralph brought in. So there's many, many, many things, including building the Senior Fellows program that I built for him, that he brought in to keep this place alive and vibrant and innovative. And it really, truly is a remarkable achievement.
The harder problem is changing the culture of an organization that is already successful. Okay. And what I'd like to share with you is my perspective on that, but do it through something that happened to me, earlier in my tenure. So I was asked by DoD to come down to a meeting of senior officials, recently retired, some longer retired, senior folks that were looking at, hey, what would it take to change the culture of their environment? And they had come up with a goal that was really gussied up in very nice language, but it effectively was, we'd like to have a more innovative culture. Right? And I was asked, what did I think of that idea? And they had asked me to come down because they had noted that we had effectively changed the culture at APL quite significantly. And I said, I think it's a terrible idea. Right? And they said, a terrible idea, but look what you've done at APL. How did you do that without? I said, we did it by not focusing on the culture, right? And they said, well, what did you do? I said, you take an organization, especially a successful organization, and you say, hey, let's change the culture and let's make it more innovative. And the people there are going to look and say, why? Right? We're successful. Why should we do something different? What we sought to do instead was focus on what we were trying to achieve and then get buy-in on that. Now, for us, what we ended up coming up with was the creation of defining innovations. Okay. We then sought to get buy-in at the leadership level on, hey, do we agree this is what the lab should be about and what we should be pursuing? and we got buy-in. Well, once we got buy-in on that, then it was now a matter of, okay, we're going to now invest in areas. How should we invest? Well, do we think these things have the potential to be defining innovations? So that became a rallying cry and basically a focus for us where everything we were investing in had to have this potential to be a defining innovation, even though only a few things might actually come out the other side. But the level of contribution we're going to make in all areas is going to rise as a result of that. And so effectively it was a significant process drawn out over a few years, where we basically, said, this is really what we're going to go after. And this is what we expect people to be, pursuing and going after.